The story of Princess Margaret begins in a world that looked perfect from the outside, but was already quietly divided from the inside. From the moment she was born, her role was defined in a single word that would follow her for the rest of her life: despair. Her older sister, Queen Elizabeth II, was the future of the monarchy, trained from a young age to carry the weight of the crown. Margaret, on the other hand, existed just beside that destiny, close enough to feel it, but never meant to hold it, and that difference shaped everything. Where Elizabeth was disciplined, reserved, and careful, Margaret was something else entirely. She was sharp, witty, and effortlessly magnetic. People were drawn to her energy. She laughed louder, spoke more freely, and carried a kind of natural charisma that made her stand out in every room she entered. In many ways, she felt more modern than the institution she represented, but that was also the problem. Because the monarchy she lived inside of was not built for individuality. It was built for control. And in the early 1950s, that control was absolute. The moment that defined this conflict came when she fell in love. The man was Peter Townsend, a decorated war hero and someone who had been close to her family for years. Their connection wasn't impulsive or shallow. It was real, and it grew in a way that felt almost inevitable. But there was one detail that turned their relationship into a national crisis. He was divorced. At the time, that single fact made the relationship unacceptable to both the church and the government. The Church of England, which the monarch formally leads, did not allow remarriage after divorce under those circumstances, and the government, led by Winston Churchill, made it clear that this was not just a personal matter. It was political, public, symbolic. Margaret was given a choice, but it wasn't really a choice. She could marry the man she loved, but she would have to give up everything. Her title, her role, her income, her place in the royal family. Or she could stay where she was and walk away from him completely. For months, the world watched as this played out in headlines, speculation, and silence. Every glance, every appearance, every word was analyzed. And in the end, she made a decision that would define her life. She chose duty. She announced that she would not marry him, saying she was mindful of the church's teachings. It sounded composed, controlled, and loyal. But behind that statement was something much heavier. It wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the realization that her life would never fully belong to her. And after that moment, something in her changed. The woman who had once been defined by potential and charm began to move differently through the world. She became more visible, more social, more immersed in the cultural life of London. It was as if she was trying to reclaim something that had been taken from her. A sense of freedom, of identity, of choice. She spent time in jazz clubs, surrounded by artists, musicians, and people who lived outside the rigid structure she was bound to. These spaces offered something the palace never could. They offered unpredictability, expression, real emotion. And for a while, it seemed like she was building a new version of her life. Then, in 1960, she met Anthony Armstrong Jones. He was everything the royal world wasn't. Creative, unconventional. A photographer with an eye for detail and a lifestyle that didn't fit into tradition. Their relationship felt different from the beginning, less restrained, more aligned with who Margaret actually was. When they married, it was seen as something new, something modern. The ceremony was broadcast to millions, marking a shift in how the monarchy connected with the public. For a moment, it looked like Margaret had finally found a balance between her role and her personal life. But that balance didn't last. Because what looked like freedom on the surface still existed within a system that never truly loosened its grip. And slowly, the cracks began to show. As the years passed, the marriage that once symbolized a new beginning started to unravel in ways that were both private and painfully public. The connection between Margaret and Anthony Armstrong Jones, which had once felt electric and unconventional, became strained under pressure that few relationships could withstand. Their lives were filled with expectation, constant visibility, and a lack of real privacy. What began as compatibility slowly turned into conflict. Arguments became more frequent, distance grew, and eventually, both of them began to look elsewhere. The idea of a royal marriage breaking down was not something the institution was comfortable with. Stability was part of the image it relied on, but this situation could not be contained forever. The separation became known, and in time, it led to something that hadn't been seen in generations. A royal divorce. It was the first of its kind since the era of Henry VIII. And it marked a significant shift in how the monarchy was perceived. For Margaret, it was another turning point. The public, which had once admired her style, confidence, and energy, began to look at her differently. The same traits that had once made her fascinating were now framed as excessive, unpredictable, even irresponsible. The narrative had changed, and it changed quickly. During the 1970s, that shift became even more intense. Her relationship with Roddy Llewellyn, a man significantly younger than her, became the center of media attention. Photographs of them together, taken on the island of Mustique, spread rapidly. The story was everywhere. It wasn't just reported, it was judged. Suddenly, Margaret was no longer seen as the modern, vibrant princess. She was labeled, criticized, reduced to headlines that ignored the full picture of her life. The work she continued to do, the hundreds of engagements she attended, the responsibilities she maintained, all of it was overshadowed. And that shift carried weight, because for someone who had lived their entire life in the public eye, perception was everything. At the same time, her health began to decline. Years of heavy smoking took their toll. In 1985, she underwent a serious lung operation, a moment that forced a temporary pause in a life that had always been in motion. But the challenges didn't stop there. As time went on, she suffered a series of strokes that gradually reduced her mobility. The woman who had once been known for her presence, her movement, her energy, found herself increasingly limited. The change was not just physical, it was deeply personal. Being confined to a wheelchair was not just a medical reality, it was a direct contrast to everything she had once been. The independence, the visibility, the sense of control she had fought for in different ways throughout her life was slowly slipping away. And yet, even as her world became smaller, she didn't fully withdraw. She remained present, loyal to her sister, Queen Elizabeth II, and committed to her role within the royal family. Despite everything, the scrutiny, the criticism, the personal losses, she continued to carry out her duties with a sense of responsibility that never fully left her. In many ways, her life became a quiet contradiction. She had pushed against tradition, but she never abandoned it. She had sought freedom, but she remained within the system. She had been ahead of her time, but lived in a structure that wasn't ready for that. And maybe that's what makes her story different, because it isn't just about royalty. It's about what happens when someone tries to define themselves inside a world that already decided who they should be. When she passed away in 2002, just weeks before her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, it marked the end of a life that had been lived almost entirely under observation. But the image she left behind wasn't simple. She wasn't just the rebel. She wasn't just the royal. She wasn't just the controversy. She was all of it at once. A woman who carried expectation, resisted it in her own way, and never fully escaped it. And in the end, that may be the most human part of her story.